Welcome to Galactic Nova Stories, where cosmic emotions come to life. Your journey begins now. The twin sons of Nexar cast long shadows across the withering crops as 10-year-old Kira pressed her face against the kitchen window, watching her mother weep again. Elena sat hunched over the old wooden table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that seemed to echo through their empty farmhouse like ghost whispers. 3 months had passed since father walked out, taking only his travel bag and leaving behind a note that said he couldn't handle this life anymore. Kira's young mind couldn't understand how someone could just abandon everything they'd built together. The farm that had once buzzed with laughter and hope now felt like a graveyard of broken dreams. The irrigation systems father had installed were failing, pipes bursting and machinery grinding to a halt without his human engineering expertise. The alien vegetables they grew for the local markets were dying in the fields, their purple and gold leaves curling brown at the edges. Elena tried to hide her pain during the day, forcing smiles when she served Kira dinner or helped with homework. But the nights were when the truth came out. Every evening Kira would lie in her small bed and listen to the sounds drifting through their thin walls, the soft crying, the whispered words in her mother's native Nexari tongue, the painful silence that followed. Nexari were known throughout the galaxy for their emotional resilience, their ability to endure hardship with stoic grace. Elena had survived the loss of her first husband, a Nexari warrior who died protecting their settlement from raiders. She had rebuilt her life with father, a human terraforming engineer who had swept her off her feet with his gentle humor and innovative spirit. But this second abandonment seemed to have broken something fundamental in her core. Kira had inherited her mother's striking Nexari features, the luminescent silver eyes, the graceful pointed ears, the natural resilience. But she also carried human DNA from father, giving her a stubborn determination that burned like fire in her chest. As she watched Elena's shoulders shake with another wave of grief, that determination crystallized into a desperate plan. The local spaceport was only a 30-minute walk from their farm, and Kira had seen humans coming and going on cargo ships and passenger transports. They had to be different from father, she reasoned. Not all humans could be the kind of people who abandoned their families, could they? Maybe she could find one who would stay, who would love Elena the way she deserved. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Galactic Nova Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. The next morning, while Elena tended to the dying crops with mechanical precision, Kira slipped away from the farm. Her small feet kicked up clouds of red dust as she walked along the empty road toward the spaceport. The binary suns climbed higher, casting shifting shadows that seemed to dance with her determination. Nexar's spaceport was a chaotic symphony of different species and cultures. Tall insectoid Thraxians clicked their mandibles as they negotiated shipping contracts. Bulky Corvani merchants hauled massive crates filled with exotic goods. Hands scattered throughout the crowd were humans, some in military uniforms, others in the practical coveralls of traders and engineers, a few in the expensive suits of corporate executives. Kira positioned herself near the main landing platform and began her vigil, studying each human who passed by. She had developed criteria in her young mind. They had to look kind, not like father with his increasingly cold and distant expression in those final weeks. They had to seem strong enough to fix things, but gentle enough to comfort Elena. Most importantly, they couldn't have that restless look in their eyes that said they were already thinking about the next place to run. Hours passed. The suns reached their zenith, then began their descent toward the horizon. Kira's stomach growled, but she ignored it. This was too important to abandon for something as trivial as hunger. Then she saw him. Captain Marcus Beck stood at the edge of the landing platform, his weathered face turned toward the sunset. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners. His clothes were practical but clean, dark pants, a simple shirt, and a worn leather jacket that spoke of countless journeys among the stars. There was something solid and dependable about him, like the ancient oak trees that grew near their farm. But most importantly, When he looked at a young Nexari child who had dropped her toy near his feet, Beck didn't just return it. He knelt down, smiled warmly, and said something that made the child giggle before sending her back to her parents with gentle care. This was him. This was the human who could save her mother. Kira took a deep breath, summoned every ounce of courage she possessed and began walking toward Captain Beck, her heart hammering with hope and desperation in equal measure. Captain Beck was inspecting the cargo manifest for his ship, the Stellar Wanderer, when small fingers tugged at his jacket sleeve. He looked down to find a young Nexari girl with silver eyes that held far too much sadness for someone her age. Her clothes were clean but patched, and her expression carried a weight that reminded him of soldiers he'd known, who had seen too much war. "Excuse me, sir," Kira said in accented standard, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Are you married?" Beck's eyebrows shot up. Of all the questions he'd expected from a random child at a spaceport, that wasn't one of them. "Well, no, I'm not. Why do you ask?" Kira took a deep breath, remembering the words she'd practiced during her long walk. "My mother needs a husband. She cries every night since my father left us. Our farm is dying and she's forgetting how to smile. You look like you could make her happy." The directness of it hit Beck like a physical blow. He'd been a salvage operator for 20 years, traveling between systems and collecting abandoned technology and materials. He'd seen poverty, desperation, and heartbreak in 1,000 different forms across 100 worlds. But this child's matter-of-fact presentation of her family's pain was somehow more moving than any plea he'd ever heard. "Kid, Beck started, then stopped. What was the appropriate response to such a request? "What's your name?" "Kira Voss. My mother is Elena Voss. She's the most beautiful and kind person in the galaxy, but she won't believe that anymore. She thinks she's cursed because 2 men have left her." Kira's composure cracked slightly, and Beck caught a glimpse of the desperate child beneath her determined exterior. Beck knelt down to Kira's eye level, studying her face. Humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy for their empathy, their ability to form emotional connections across species barriers. It was what made them excellent diplomats, traders, and mediators. Looking at this brave little girl, Beck felt that uniquely human response stirring in his chest. "Kira, I can't just marry your mother. Marriage isn't something you can arrange. Like ordering cargo supplies. People need to know each other, to care about each other." "Then come meet her," Kira interrupted. "Come see our farm. Help us fix what's broken. If you don't like her, you can leave. But if you do—" She trailed off, hope shining in her silver eyes. Beck ran a hand through his graying hair, considering. His next salvage contract wasn't for another week, and he'd been planning to spend that time in the spaceport's cantinas, drinking away the loneliness that had become his constant companion. The Wanderer was a fine ship, but it was also empty and silent except for the hum of engines and life support. "You said your farm is having problems?" he asked. Kira nodded eagerly. "The irrigation systems are breaking down. Father installed them. But he didn't leave any maintenance guides. The crop yield is down 70%, and we can't afford to hire a human engineer to fix everything." That sparked Beck's interest. He'd started as an engineer before becoming a salvage operator, and mechanical problems were puzzles he genuinely enjoyed solving. More than that, there was something about this child's unwavering determination that reminded him why he'd once believed in the power of families to overcome impossible odds. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for their tendency to adopt and protect others, regardless of species. It was an evolutionary trait that had served them well as they spread across the stars, forming alliances and building communities wherever they went. Beck had never had a family of his own, but perhaps that very fact made him more susceptible to Kira's desperate hope. "Tell you what," Beck said, making a decision that would change all their lives. "I've got some time before my next job. I could take a look at your farm's systems, see if there's anything I can fix. No promises about the other stuff, but maybe I can help with the practical problems." Kira's face lit up, like Nexar's twin suns. "Really? You'll come home with me?" "I'll follow you in my ship. Where's your farm located?" Kira gave him directions to the agricultural district, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Beck listened, already mentally cataloguing the tools and spare parts he had in the Wanderer's cargo hold that might be useful for irrigation repair. As they walked toward the ship, Beck found himself wondering what kind of woman Elena Voss must be to inspire such fierce loyalty in her daughter. What kind of life had she built and lost that left a 10-year-old child desperate enough to proposition strangers at spaceports? "Captain Beck," Kira said as they reached the Wanderer's boarding. "Ramp, just Beck is fine. Thank you. Even if you can't stay, thank you for being willing to try. Most humans just say no without listening." Beck felt something tighten in his chest at those words. How many people had this child approached before him? How many times had she been turned away? The thought of her making this desperate journey, repeatedly growing more disappointed each time, made him angry at the callousness of the universe. "Come on, kid," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "Let's go meet your mother." The Voss farm sprawled across a valley between two low hills, its fields stretching toward the horizon in neat rows that had once been perfectly maintained. Now, Beck could see the signs of neglect everywhere, sagging support posts, patches of dead vegetation, and the telltale shimmer of malfunctioning moisture barriers that no longer protected the crops from Nexar's harsh twin-sun radiation. Elena emerged from the farmhouse as Beck's shuttle touched down, wiping her hands on a faded apron. Even from a distance, he could see why Kira believed her mother was beautiful. Elena moved with the natural grace of her people, her silver hair catching the light as she approached. But there was a wariness in her posture, and dark circles under her eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Mama!" Kira called out, running toward Elena with barely contained excitement. "I brought help." Elena's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as Beck emerged from the shuttle, tool case in hand. "Kira, what have you done?" "I found someone to fix our farm," Kira announced proudly. "Captain Beck is an engineer and he's going to help us." Beck watched Elena's face cycle through several emotions: embarrassment, resignation, and finally a weary sort of acceptance. She had the haunted look of someone who'd grown accustomed to disappointment, but lacked the energy to fight it anymore. "Apologize for my daughter's initiative," Elena said in careful standard, her Nexari accent making the words musical despite their formal tone. "I hope she didn't impose on you too much." "No imposition," Beck replied, setting down his case, and looking around the farm with professional interest. "Kira mentioned you're having trouble with irrigation systems. I've got some time before my next job and I don't mind taking a look." Elena studied him for a long moment, those luminous silver eyes searching his face for hidden motives or false promises. "You're very kind, but we can't afford to pay for professional repairs. The harvest has been—" "No charge," Beck interrupted. "Consider it a favor between travelers." Humans had a galaxy-wide reputation for their generosity, but Elena had learned not to trust easy kindness. Her late husband, Dane, had been a fellow Nexari, strong, loyal, and dependable, until Raider fire cut him down defending their settlement. Her second husband, the human who'd fathered Kira, had seemed equally dependable until the day he simply left. But there was something different about this human. Beck's brown eyes held no trace of the restless hunger that had eventually consumed her former husband. Instead, there was a steadiness there, a competence that suggested problems were simply puzzles to be solved rather than burdens to be escaped. "Mama, show him the main control panel," Kira urged, tugging at Elena's hand. "The one that makes the weird noise." Elena hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. But please, don't feel obligated to trust me," Beck said with a slight smile. "After 20 years in space, I've learned that broken machinery is usually just machinery that needs to be understood better." They walked toward the central irrigation hub, a weathered concrete structure housing the farm's water distribution systems. As they went, Beck listened to the sounds the equipment made, the irregular cycling of pumps, the whistle of air in the lines, the grinding protest of overtaxed motors. "Are your husband installed all this?" Beck asked, running his hands along the control panels. Elena's expression darkened. "My former husband, yes. He was very talented with mechanical systems." Beck caught the pain in her voice and changed the subject, focusing on the work at hand. That was the thing about humans. They understood that sometimes action spoke louder than words, that fixing what was broken could be a form of communication all its own. For the next 3 hours, Beck worked his way through the irrigation system with methodical precision. Kira appointed herself his assistant, fetching tools and asking endless questions about human engineering techniques. Elena watched from a distance at first, but gradually moved closer as she saw the genuine care Beck took with each component. "This is impressive work," Beck commented, straightening a bent pressure regulator. "Your former husband really knew what he was doing. The design is elegant, much better than most colonial installations I've seen." Elena softened slightly at the compliment. "He said the key was working with Nexar's natural water table instead of against it. He spent months studying our geological surveys before designing the system." Smart approach. Humans sometimes try to brute force solutions, but the best engineering adapts to local conditions. Beck paused in his work, looking directly at Elena. "Any idea why he left maintenance manuals behind? Most engineers document their systems obsessively." Elena's face closed off again. "He wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. The isolation, the long growing seasons. Some humans find frontier life more difficult than they expect." Beck nodded, understanding more than Elena realized. He'd seen it before. People who fell in love with the idea of a simpler life, but couldn't handle the reality of endless horizons and the weight of genuine responsibility. As the day wore on, something shifted in the atmosphere around the farm. The mechanical noises grew more regular as Beck's adjustments took effect. Kira chatted excitedly about the improvements, and even Elena began to relax as she watched her farm slowly come back to life. When Beck finally shut down the main control panel as the sun set, the irrigation system was running smoothly for the first time in months. The sound of water flowing properly through the distribution lines was like music to Elena's ears. "Thank you," she said quietly, and Beck heard genuine emotion beneath the simple words. "You've saved our harvest." "Just returning a favor," Beck replied. "The galaxy's been good to me. Nice to give something back." As they stood in the fading light, listening to the gentle hum of properly functioning machinery, something passed between them. Not romantic attraction. Not yet. But a recognition of mutual competence and shared purpose that would grow into something much deeper. Beck spent 3 more days at the Voss farm, and with each passing hour the place seemed to transform around him. The irrigation systems hummed with renewed efficiency, crops began showing healthier growth, and most importantly, the haunted expression in Elena's eyes started to soften. On the 4th morning, as Beck adjusted the filtration pumps, Kira approached him with the careful deliberation that had become familiar. She had something on her mind, and experience had taught him to listen when she got that look. "Beck," she said, settling cross-legged on the ground beside his work, "can I tell you about my real father?" Beck's hand stilled on the wrench he'd been using. He'd been wondering about the family's history, but hadn't wanted to push. "If you want to, sure. Mama thinks I don't remember him, but I do. His name was Dane, and he wasn't human like the father who left us." Kira picked at the red dirt with her fingers. "He was Nexari, like Mama. He died when I was 5. Beck set down his tools and gave Kira his full attention. The girl had been carrying this story for days, waiting for the right moment to share it. "Dain was a warrior," Kira continued. "He protected our settlement from raiders, bad people who came to steal and hurt others. He died fighting them, but he saved everyone else. Mama always said he was the bravest person she knew. And then your mother met the other one, yes." Kira's voice carried mature disdain for someone her age. "He came to help rebuild after the raids. He was kind at first, and he made Mama laugh again. But he never understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself." Beck felt pieces clicking into place. Elena hadn't just lost 2 husbands. She'd lost 2 completely different types of men, each representing different kinds of security and companionship. Dain had died as a hero, leaving her with memories of true partnership and sacrifice. The human who'd followed had simply abandoned his responsibilities when they became inconvenient. "Humans are different from each other, you know," Beck said carefully. Just like Nexari are different from each other. Some humans are builders and stayers. Others are wanderers who can't settle down. Kira nodded solemnly. I know. That's why I watched you so carefully at the spaceport. I looked for someone who had staying eyes instead of leaving eyes. The simple wisdom of that statement hit Beck like a physical blow. This 10-year-old child had developed her own criteria for judging character, born from bitter experience and mature observation. What if I have leaving eyes too? Beck asked gently. Kira studied his face with those luminous silver eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. You don't. You have fixing eyes. When you look at our farm, you see how to make it better. When you look at Mama, you see how beautiful she is underneath her sadness. People with leaving eyes only see what's wrong. That afternoon, as Beck worked, on the atmospheric processors that regulated humidity in the storage barns, Elena brought him fresh water and watched him work. Her Nexari heritage gave her natural patience, and she seemed to find something soothing in observing his methodical approach to problem-solving. Kira told you about Dane, Elena said eventually. It wasn't a question. She did. I'm sorry for your loss. Elena was quiet for a long moment. I thought I'd learned to judge character after what happened with him. But humans, you're more complex than other species. Your emotions shift like weather patterns. Beck stopped working and looked at her directly. We're not that mysterious. Most of us want the same things. Purpose, companionship, a place where we belong. The trick is figuring out who's willing to work for those things and who thinks they should just happen automatically. And which type are you? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with significance beyond its simple words. Beck set down his tools and considered his answer carefully. I've been a wanderer most of my life, he said finally, but wandering and running away aren't the same thing. I've drifted because I never found something worth staying for. That doesn't mean I'm incapable of staying, just that I've been selective about where I invest my effort. Elena absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. The man who left us, he said frontier life was too hard, too isolated, too demanding. Maybe it was for him. Some people need cities, need constant stimulation and change, but some of us find peace in open spaces and honest work. Beck gestured toward the fields where their crops grew under Nexar's twin sons. This is beautiful, Elena. What you've built here is worth protecting. Something shifted in Elena's posture. A subtle relaxation that suggested walls carefully built over months were beginning to lower. Dine used to say that home isn't a place, it's the people who make you want to stay. Smart. Man, yes, he was, and brave and loyal. Elena paused. I used to think I could only love one type of person, the warrior type, like Dane, but maybe there are different kinds of strength. Beck felt his heart rate increase. Elena was beautiful, certainly, but more than that, she was resilient and kind and fiercely devoted to her daughter. Watching her struggle to rebuild her life had awakened something in him that he hadn't felt in years, the desire to be part of something larger than himself. Elena, he said quietly, I want you to know. His words were interrupted by alarms blaring from the main house. Both adults ran toward the sound, where they found Kira at the communication console, her face pale with fear. Mama, she said, voice shaking. The proximity sensors are picking up ships approaching. Multiple contacts, moving fast. Beck and Elena exchanged glances. In the outer systems, unscheduled arrivals usually meant only one thing: raiders. The approaching ships appeared on the horizon like dark scars against Nexar's amber sky. Beck counted 5 vessels, light attack crafts designed for quick strikes on isolated settlements. His stomach clenched as he recognized the configuration. These weren't random pirates looking for easy salvage. These were organized raiders with military-grade equipment. How long until they reach us? Beck asked, his mind already shifting into the tactical mode that had kept him alive during his years in the outer systems. 12 minutes, maybe 15, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She was transforming before. Beck's eyes, the grieving widow disappearing as something harder and more dangerous took its place. They're trying to mask their approach vector, but they're coming fast. Kira stood frozen by the console until Elena gently moved her aside. "Kira, go to the safe room. Remember what we practiced." "No," Kira protested. "I want to help." Elena knelt down and took her daughter's hands. "You help by staying safe. If something happens to us, you're the one who'll carry on our family story. That's the most important job of all." Beck watched the exchange with growing respect for Elena's strength. This wasn't the first time she'd faced raiders. Her calm efficiency spoke of hard-won experience. But he also saw the way her hands trembled slightly as she kissed Kira's forehead. "What kind of defenses do you have?" Beck asked, as Elena sealed Kira into the reinforced storage room beneath the farmhouse. "Basic perimeter shields, good for about 10 minutes under sustained fire. A few hunting rifles. The communication array is already calling for help, but the nearest patrol ships are hours away." Elena's expression darkened. The last time they came, Dane held them off long enough for the settlement's militia to arrive. But he had 15 other warriors with him. Beck nodded grimly. 2 people against 5 raider ships weren't good odds by any calculation, but humans hadn't survived and thrived across the galaxy by accepting impossible odds as final answers. "Elena, I need you to trust me. Do you have access to your power grid's main controls?" "Yes, but..." "Good. I'm going to prepare a few surprises that might even our odds. Can you handle the shield controls and weapons systems?" Elena's silver eyes flashed with something fierce and determined. "I was raised on the warrior codes of my people. My first husband taught me to fight, and my second husband taught me to think tactically. Yes, I can handle the weapons. Then let's show these raiders why humans and Nexari make a dangerous combination." The next 10 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Beck had spent years salvaging abandoned technology, and he'd learned that desperate situations called for creative solutions. He rerouted power from non-essential systems, turning the farm's irrigation network into an improvised defensive grid. The atmospheric processors became crude but effective sensor jammers. Even the storage barn's temperature controls were repurposed. As part of his plan, Elena worked with equal intensity, checking their weapon systems and setting up overlapping fields of fire. She moved with the fluid grace of someone trained in combat, but Beck caught glimpses of the pain underneath her professionalism. This farm represented everything she'd built and lost and rebuilt again. Defending it wasn't just about survival. It was about protecting the life she'd fought so hard to create. "They're coming in low, trying to avoid our sensors," Eleanor reported as the raiders approached. "Standard intimidation pattern. They'll probably demand we surrender our supplies and other valuables." Beck understood the pause. Raiders didn't just take crops and equipment. They took people, especially those who could be sold in the outer system slave markets. The thought of anyone laying hands on Elena or Kira filled him with a cold fury that surprised him with its intensity. "Let them get close," Beck said. "We need them in range of our surprises." The first raider ship screamed overhead, its engines leaving ionized trails in the air. A voice crackled over their communication system, speaking in heavily accented standard. "Farmers below. Bring out your valuables and surrender your women. Comply and we'll let you live to rebuild." Elena's expression hardened. "Same demands as always. No imagination. Good thing we're more creative than they are." Beck's fingers flew over the improvised controls he'd rigged. "On my mark, drop the shields and hit them with everything we've got." The raider ships circled like predatory birds, their pilots confident in their overwhelming advantage. Beck waited until they committed to their attack formation, then gave Salesina the signal. What happened next defied every tactical manual ever written. The moment Elena dropped their defensive shields, Beck triggered his improvised systems. The irrigation network, supercharged with redirected power, created an electromagnetic pulse that scrambled the raiders' targeting systems. The atmospheric processors released clouds of metallic chaff that turned their sensors into useless static. 2 raider ships, flying too low and fast to compensate for their sudden blindness, clipped each other and spiraled toward the ground in twin fireballs. While the remaining raiders struggled to regain control, Elena opened fire with their defensive weapons. Her shots were precise and devastating, guided by the tactical training her first husband had given her and enhanced by the human technology her second husband had installed. But the raiders were professionals. Despite their losses, they adapted quickly, using their superior numbers to bracket the farm with overlapping fire patterns. The improvised defenses couldn't hold forever. "We're not going to be able to keep this up," Elena said, as their shield. Generators began to overheat. Beck looked at the tactical display, calculating odds and possibilities. Then he made a decision that would change everything. "Elena, I need you to trust me one more time. Can you override the power limiters on your husband's engineering systems? That would create a massive energy surge. It could destroy half the farm, or it could save all of it." Beck met her eyes. "I've got an idea, but it's dangerous." Elena didn't hesitate. "Do it." Their faith in each other, forged in just 4 days but tempered by crisis, would prove to be the weapon the raiders never saw coming. The energy surge that Beck triggered through the farm's systems created something none of them had expected. A localized distortion field that interfered with the raiders' navigation and weapons systems. It was a phenomenon that should have been impossible with conventional technology, but the unique combination of Nexari crystalline power cores and human engineering had produced something entirely new. The remaining raider ships found themselves caught in an energy net they couldn't escape or understand. Their systems flickered between operational and dead, their pilots struggling to maintain control as Beck and Elena systematically disabled each vessel. Within minutes, what had seemed like certain defeat had become total victory. As the smoke cleared and debris settled across their fields, Elena and Beck stood side by side, breathing hard and covered in dust. The farm had taken damage, but it was superficial compared to what could have been lost. "We did it," Elena whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. "We actually did it." Beck looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a beautiful Nexari woman, but a warrior, a survivor, a partner who had trusted him completely in their moment of greatest danger. Something fundamental had changed between them during the battle, bonds forged by shared risk and mutual faith. "Elena," he started, then stopped as Kira burst from the safe room and launched herself into their arms. "I heard the explosion stop," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Are they gone? Are we safe?" "They're gone, little star," Elena murmured, using the Nexari endearment she'd called Kira since birth. "We're safe." But even as Elena comforted her daughter, her eyes sought Beck's over Kira's head. The question hanging between them was no longer whether Beck would stay. The events of the day had answered that decisively. The question now was what form their future would take. 3 days later, as Beck prepared to leave for what he'd told, then would be his final salvage run, Elena found him in the repair shed staring at a small device in his hands. "What's that?" she asked softly. Beck looked up, startled. He'd been so lost in thought he hadn't heard her approach. "Communication relay. I've been trying to figure out how to tell my business partners that I'm retiring from active salvage." Eleanor's heart skipped, but she kept her voice carefully neutral. "And have you decided what to tell them?" "That I've found something worth staying for." Beck set down the device and stepped closer to her. "Eleanor, I know this is happening fast. I know you have reasons to be careful about humans and their promises. But what we've built over the past week, what we discovered about ourselves during the raid," Elena placed a gentle finger against his lips, silencing him. "Beck, you don't need to explain or justify anything. You've already shown me who you are through your actions." "And who am I?" Elena smiled, the first truly radiant expression Beck had seen from her. "You're the human who fixed our farm not because we asked, but because you saw what needed doing. You're the man who stayed to fight for us when you could have run. You're someone who sees Kira's brilliant mind and encourages it instead of being threatened by it." "Elena, let me finish," she said, though her voice was gentle. "I thought I knew what love looked like. With Dane it was passionate and immediate, love at first sight across a crowded room. But with you, it's been like watching a sunrise. So gradual I didn't notice at first, then suddenly overwhelming in its beauty." Beck felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that when you leave tomorrow, I want you to come back. Not as a helpful stranger or even as a friend. Come back as someone who belongs here. Come back as my partner, my co-parent, my husband if you'll have me. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deeper as weeks of building attraction, and emotional connection finally found expression. When they broke apart, both were breathless and shining with happiness. "There's just one problem," Beck said, his forehead resting against hers. Elena's stomach dropped. "What?" "I'll have to ask Kira for permission to marry her mother. She was the one who found me, after all. I think she should have final approval." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and musical in the warm air of the shed. "I think she might agree to the arrangement." That night, as the three of them sat on the farmhouse porch watching Nexar's twin moons rise over the horizon, Beck formally asked Kira for her mother's hand in marriage. "I thought you'd never ask," Kira said solemnly, then broke into the biggest grin he'd ever seen. "Yes, you can marry Mama, but I have conditions." "Name them," Beck said, equally serious. "First, you have to teach me everything about human engineering. Second, you have to help me build a better defense system for the farm so this never happens again. And third," Kira paused dramatically, "you have to promise you'll never leave us, even when things get hard." Beck extended his hand to Kira, as if sealing a business contract. "Deal. But I have one condition of my own." "What?" "You have to help me learn Nexari customs so I can be a proper husband to your mother and a proper father to you." Kira shook his hand firmly. "Deal." Elena watched the exchange with tears in her eyes, marveling at how perfectly Beck understood her daughter's need for agency in this decision. He wasn't just marrying her, he was joining their family, accepting all the responsibilities and joys that came with it. The next morning, Beck left for his final salvage run, but the goodbye felt different from any farewell he'd ever experienced. Eleanor and Kira stood at the spaceport, waving until his ship disappeared among the stars. This time, the departure held no sadness, only the sweet anticipation of reunion. Beck's final salvage mission took him to the Kepler debris field, where a massive space station had been destroyed decades earlier during a corporate war. The twisted metal and forgotten technology floating in the asteroid belt represented a fortune in rare materials, but it also held dangers that had claimed many salvage crews over the years. For 3 weeks, Beck worked with methodical precision, his thoughts never far from the farm on Nexar. Every piece of valuable salvage he collected was another credit toward his new life with Elena and Kira. Every successful navigation through the dangerous debris field brought him one day closer to home. But the Kepler field had one more surprise waiting for him. Beck was extracting quantum processors from the station's core when his proximity alarms screamed. A massive piece of debris, part of the station's original superstructure, had broken free from its orbit and was tumbling directly toward his position. He had seconds to react. The escape pod's launch sequence seemed to take forever. Beck felt the crushing acceleration as he blasted clear of his ship just moments before the debris crushed the stellar wanderer like an empty can. The explosion that followed sent shockwaves through the surrounding asteroid field, setting off a chain reaction of collisions that lit up space like fireworks. Beck drifted in his escape pod for 18 hours before a patrol ship picked up his distress signal. By then, hypothermia and oxygen depletion had taken their toll. He slipped into unconsciousness as the rescue ship's medical bay doors closed around him, his last thought focused on silver eyes and warm laughter on a distant farm. Meanwhile, on Nexar, Elena paced the farmhouse like a caged animal. Beck's scheduled return had passed 3 days ago with no word. The spaceport authorities had no information about delays or accidents. Elena tried to maintain her composure for Kira's sake, but her daughter was equally worried. Maybe his ship broke down, Kira suggested for the 10th time that morning. "You know how old human salvage vessels can be." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd lost 2 husbands already. The thought that the universe might be cruel enough to take a third man she loved, this time to accident rather than abandonment, was almost too much to bear. When the emergency communication finally came, it brought both relief and terror. Beck was alive but critically injured, recovering in a medical facility 3 systems away. Elena made arrangements for their neighbors to watch the farm and booked passage on the next transport, bringing Kira with her despite the girl's protests that she was old enough to stay alone. The medical center was a sterile maze of white corridors and humming machinery. Elena and Kira found Beck in the intensive care ward, connected to a web of life support systems. His face was pale beneath the healing accelerators, but his eyes opened when he heard their voices. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing apparatus he'd only recently been disconnected from. "Of course we came," Elena said, taking his hand gently. "Did you think we'd let you recover alone?" "The doctors said you might not make it," Kira added, climbing carefully onto the edge of his bed. "They don't know humans very well, do they?" Beck managed a weak smile. "Humans are stubborn, especially when we have something worth fighting for." Elena spent the next 2 weeks at Beck's bedside, leaving only when Kira insisted she needed food or sleep. She watched over his recovery with the same fierce dedication she'd once shown protecting her farm from raiders. The medical staff, accustomed to dealing with patients' families from dozens of species, remarked that they'd never seen devotion quite like Elena's combination of Nexari patience and human determination. Kira appointed herself Beck's entertainment committee, regaling him with stories about the farm's continued recovery and the improvements she was planning to make with her newfound knowledge of human engineering. Her chatter covered the worried silence that would otherwise have filled the room, and her absolute faith in Beck's recovery seemed to accelerate his healing. "The irrigation system is running at 97% efficiency," she reported one afternoon, "and I've designed modifications that should increase crop yield by another 15%. Beck, are you listening?" "Every word," Beck assured her, though his eyes were fixed on Elena, who was reading agricultural reports by his bedside. The simple domestic scene, Kira planning improvements while Elena handled business, felt like the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "When you're better, we're going to build those defense systems we talked about," Kira continued, "but better than what we had before. I want multiple redundant systems, adaptive shielding, and maybe some of those distortion field generators like what happened during the fight." Beck raised an eyebrow. "You've been thinking about this every night. Mama has trouble sleeping when you're not there. So she and I stay up planning improvements to keep us busy." Elena flushed slightly but didn't deny it. "The farm feels empty. Without you, we both realized how much you'd become part of our daily routines." "Elena," Beck said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you about the accident." Her expression grew concerned. "What about it? I had over 40 chances to abandon my ship and escape safely. Do you know why I stayed as long as I did?" Elena waited, sensing the importance of his words. "Because every piece of salvage I extracted was worth credits. Credits I was planning to use to buy you an engagement ring and help expand the farm." Beck's voice grew stronger with each word. "I stayed because I have a future to build with you and Kira. That's worth risking everything for." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Beck Adams, you magnificent, foolish human, don't you know that all I need is you?" "Actually," Kira interrupted with the perfect timing only children possess, "there are a few things we need besides just Beck. Better farm equipment, for instance, and maybe a bigger house." Both adults laughed, and for the first time since the accident, Beck felt completely at peace. His body was healing, his future was secure, and his family was exactly where they belonged, together. 1 year later, the Voss Adams farm had become something of a legend in their sector. The wedding celebration had drawn visitors from across 3 systems, including representatives from the Nexari Warrior Council, who came to honor Elena's courage during the raider attack, and human engineering guilds interested in Beck's innovative defensive technologies. The ceremony itself had been a perfect blend of both their cultures. Elena wore traditional Nexari ceremonial robes that shimmered with embedded crystals, while Beck donned formal attire modified with Nexari symbols of protection and prosperity. Kira served as both ring-bearer and cultural translator, explaining the significance of each ritual to guests who weren't familiar with the opposite species' customs. Now, as Beck stood in the main control room of their expanded farm complex, he marveled at what they'd accomplished together. The original homestead, had grown into a thriving agricultural enterprise that employed 12 families and supplied produce to half the sector. Their innovations in cross-species farming techniques had attracted attention from the Galactic Agricultural Council, and their defensive systems had become a model for frontier settlement protection. But more than the material success, it was the sense of belonging that filled Beck with contentment. He'd spent most of his adult life moving from job to job, planet to planet, never staying long enough to form lasting connections. Now every morning brought the joy of waking up beside Elena, and every evening ended with family dinners, filled with Kira's excited chatter about her latest inventions or discoveries. "Papa Beck," Kira called out, using the name she'd settled on after the wedding. She was 13 now, tall for her age and brilliant beyond her years. The atmospheric readings from Sector 7 are weird again. Beck loved that Kira called him Papa, not to replace her memory of Diane, whom she still honored, but to acknowledge the different role he played in her life. He was the father who taught her to build and design, while Diane remained the father who taught her about courage and sacrifice. "Define weird," Beck said, walking over to examine the data Kira had compiled. "The humidity levels are cycling in patterns that don't match our programming. It's almost like the system is adapting itself to optimize growing conditions beyond our original parameters." Elena entered the control room carrying 2 steaming cups of the Nexari beverage that had become Beck's morning addiction. "Let me guess," she said with amusement. "Our daughter has discovered something that shouldn't be possible again." "It's not impossible," Kira protested. "It's just emergent behavior. The combination of human engineering and Nexari crystal, Matrices seems to create system consciousness under certain conditions." Beck accepted his cup gratefully and studied the data patterns. Over the past year, they'd discovered that the fusion of human and Nexari technologies often produced unexpected results. The farm's systems had gradually become more efficient than their original designs should have allowed, almost as if they were learning and evolving. "You know what this means," Elena said, reading his expression. "Another research paper for the Engineering Council," Beck sighed. "And probably another visit from scientists who want to study our impossible farm." "Actually," Kira said with a grin that reminded Beck strongly of Elena, "I was thinking we could license the technology, start a consulting business for other frontier settlements, adaptive agricultural systems by Voss Adams Innovations." Elena laughed. "Our 13-year-old entrepreneur strikes again." Beck felt a familiar surge of pride and love as he watched his wife and daughter plan their latest venture. The 3 of them had become something more than just a family. They were partners in building a future that none of them could have achieved alone. "There's something else," Beck said, setting down his cup. "I got a message this morning from the Colonial Development Authority. They want to offer us a contract to design defensive and agricultural systems for the new settlements in the frontier expansion project." Eleanor's eyes widened. "That would be enormous. Hundreds of colonies, thousands of families." "And we'd be helping people build better lives," Kira added, the humanitarian aspect immediately capturing her imagination. "People who are starting over like we did." Beck nodded. "The timing feels right. We've proven our concepts here. Maybe it's time to share what we've learned with others who need it." Elena moved closer to Beck, taking his hand. "What do you think? Are you ready to expand our horizons again?" Beck looked around the control room, at the displays showing their thriving crops, the pictures of their wedding day hung on the walls, the small drawings Kira had made of her latest invention, ideas. This place had taught him that home wasn't about staying in one location forever. Home was about the people who made, wherever you were, feel complete. "As long as we're together," he said, "I'm ready for anything." That evening, as they sat on their expanded porch watching Nexar's twin suns set over fields that stretched to the horizon, Beck reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He'd come to this world as a lonely salvage operator, answering a desperate child's plea. He was staying as a husband, father, and partner in building something that would outlast all of them. Elena rested her head on his shoulder, while Kira sketched designs for portable agricultural systems in her ever-present notebook. The sounds of their farm, the hum of perfectly tuned machinery, the gentle conversation of their workers heading home for the day, The whisper of wind through healthy crops created a symphony of contentment. "Beck," Elena said softly, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Kira hadn't found you that day?" Beck considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but then I remember that humans have a saying, 'The right person always finds you when you need them most.' Maybe it wasn't coincidence that brought us together. Maybe it was just destiny recognizing a perfect fit." "Papa Beck," Kira said, without looking up from her sketching, "that's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. You say, you should use that line in your speech at the colonial development ceremony." Both adults laughed, and Beck marveled again at how this brilliant, determined child had orchestrated their entire relationship from the beginning. She'd seen what they needed before they'd recognized it themselves, and her courage had created a family that none of them could have imagined. As the stars appeared in Nexar's darkening sky, Beck thought about all the humans scattered across the galaxy. Explorers, builders, dreamers who left their mark on countless worlds through determination, ingenuity, and love. He joined that proud tradition not through grand gestures or dramatic adventures, but through the simple choice to stay when staying mattered most. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but Beck had learned that the greatest discovery wasn't a new world or advanced technology. It was finding the people who made you want to build something lasting together. And sometimes that discovery began with a desperate child tugging at your sleeve in a crowded spaceport, asking the most important question in any language: "Are you married?" In the end, the answer had changed everything.